My name is Dan Marries. I'm the evening news anchor for KOLD News 13. I've been here for 17 years. I got hired as the weekend anchor back in June of 1999, and then in 2007 I was promoted to the main anchor, and now I do Monday through Friday. I do the 5, 6, and 10 for KOLD News 13, the CBS affiliate in Tucson. Well, I got started in the field of journalism back when I was in college. I went to college at Mesa State in Grand Junction, Colorado, and I had started my internship when I was a junior in college. So during my internship, I worked really hard. And so when my internship was over, a morning anchor position came open, and I applied for that position and I got it. So that's how I got my first job. My internship led to my first position as a morning anchor. Then I did the noon weather. And at that size of a station, you do it all. You write, you shoot your own video, you produce your own newscasts, we edited our own video. So that's how I got my start in the business. As soon as I graduated college, I already had a year and a half, 2 years experience. Then I went to Mankato, Minnesota for a year. I did one winter, that was enough. I wanted to come down to the desert Southwest, so I got a job at KYMA, the NBC affiliate in Yuma, Arizona. I was there for 2.5 years, and then I got here in 1999. I would say one of my more memorable stories that I've done in my, 20-plus year career. For 2 years in a row, I got to fly down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon in a Chinook helicopter with the Marine Corps. It was part of the Toys for Tots program. It is the most secluded Indian reservation in the continental United States. It's literally at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. You can either get down there by hiking, by mule train, or in my case, by helicopter. So I was with the United States Marine Corps. They had been collecting toys, and I was fortunate enough to go down with them in the helicopter to deliver those toys, and it was quite an experience. My dad was a helicopter pilot, so I grew up around helicopters, aviation, so it was pretty exciting to tell him about that. But it was an incredible experience, and to be down in such a remote area of the Grand Canyon, when you look up and just see 500, 700 foot sheer cliff walls, it puts things into perspective. You're just a tiny little speck. To be able to experience that was pretty neat. Another great story I got to do was right here in Tucson, and that was going up in an F-16 during the Heritage Day flights at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. And basically it's taking the planes of the past and then flying them with the planes of the present. So the first part of the flight was awesome. I was in an F-16 flying right next to a P-51 Mustang, which was the workhorse, one of the main planes used during World War II. And that was an incredible experience. Then we broke away from that, and that's when things got hair-raising. The pilot asked me, "Do you want to see what this thing can do?" And I said, "Absolutely." Shot straight up, pulled I think 6.5, 7 Gs. We did a bunch of rolls and loops, and I ended up filling up 2 puke bags. I couldn't take it. I asked him to fly straight. We landed, and I was queasy for about 4 hours after that. But it was an incredible experience. That was fun also sharing that with my dad, because he was the helicopter pilot, as I mentioned, but he also wanted to be a fighter pilot. So I got to do it, and he never did. So I used to rub that in his face a little bit. I would say that the most life-changing stories that I've ever done include 3 trips to Vietnam. The first one was back in 2006. I did 2 more after that. And basically what I did was I accompanied a group called Tours of Peace Vietnam Veterans that is based right here in Tucson. And they want to turn Vietnam back into a country and not a war. That's one of their missions. So they take Vietnam veterans who want to go back, they apply for the trip, and they cater it. Like if there was a veteran who was in Da Nang or Quy Nhon or Saigon, they will actually cater these trips to the veterans who are part of the group. There's usually 6 to 10 veterans per group. They try to keep it small. And they will go to some areas where these veterans were 40 years ago as young men fighting in the war. And one of the days on one of these trips, we made a 2.5-hour hike to Hill 869. And it was part of a really bad battle between the Marine Corps and the VC and the North Vietnamese Army. The Marine Corps were completely surrounded. One of the veterans I was with is a guy named Chuck. He actually found his old foxhole that he was literally bunkered down in for almost 30 days. He lost a lot of fellow Marines during that firefight, that battle, and it was an emotionally moving experience to be there with him when he got back down in that foxhole and just literally cried for probably 5 minutes. Said he just remembered all the fellow Marines that he lost during that battle, and he wanted to make that hike to help remember and honor their memories. It's a twofold for that those trips to Vietnam. Part of it was finding self-forgiveness and forgiveness for some of the veterans who might hold some of that from the war, but it's also a humanitarian mission. So the veterans get to go back to Vietnam and help. And a lot of them find a lot of healing and closure in that, because they were there before doing so much destruction and killing and just everything that the horrors associated with war. Now they come back 40, 45 years later and they're actually doing good. So it was a wonderful experience to see them, like in the beginning of this 2-week journey, some of them suffering PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, very badly. And by the end of the 2 weeks, you can actually see almost an uplifting of their spirit because they are feeling so much better. And so I did 2 documentaries on those trips to Vietnam, and one of them won an Emmy Award for cultural diversity in the documentary category.
Good evening, I'm Dan Marries. Welcome to Back Behind the Bamboo Curtain. The title implies that we've been here before, and that's partly true. About a year ago, I was lucky enough to travel with Tours of Peace, a Tucson-based nonprofit group that helps Vietnam veterans deal with lingering emotional wounds by taking them back in country on a mission of humanitarian assistance to the Vietnamese people. It was an unforgettable journey filled with heartbreak, hope, and healing. Last November, when Tours of Peace went back again, I couldn't turn down the chance to go along. This time, we would visit the heart of what was once enemy territory, a place once called North Vietnam.
So the reason I went to Vietnam for these trips, and I was the first member of the media ever invited by Jess Devaney, the founder of Tours of Peace, was to put together a documentary. I wanted to tell the story of these veterans. A lot of Vietnam veterans, they suppressed their stories because there was so much resentment against them when they got back from the war back in the 60s and 70s that a lot of them didn't even tell people that they were Vietnam veterans. So it was quite the experience for me to earn their trust in the first few days of these trips, and as they saw me there and they saw that I was there to try to tell their story, they would open up a little bit more. So on the first trip, I believe I shot, I want to say about 13 hours of video interviews, and it was a real challenge to try to get that 13 and a half hours down to a 22-25 minute segment for a half-hour special. When I went back on the second trip, some of the veterans from that first trip were there. So I got to do a comparison from how they were the first trip to how they were the second trip and their continued success in treating their PTSD. And I think those specials, those documentaries that I put together, after the second one aired, a woman called me here at the station after watching it on our station, and she called me in tears just to thank me for doing the story, because she knew that her husband was a Vietnam veteran. He never spoke one word of the war. They sat down, they watched my special together, and they spent the next 3 hours. He told her so many stories that she never knew existed. And she said watching my documentary helped him open up. And she called me in tears to thank me. And that was a phone conversation I'll never forget.
They're sometimes referred to as the forgotten generation, the older men and women of Vietnam who don't have family members to take care of them. They end up here at elderly homes. And while we've brought much needed supplies like shampoo, combs, and even milk, we bring much more than that. We bring love with a human touch. Life can get pretty lonely for the men and women living in this elderly care center in Hoi An, Vietnam, a familiar stop for Tours of Peace.
Well, this is the second time I've been here at the Hoi An nursing home, and the incredible receptivity of the people. They just soak up not only our attention, but the touching, the being with them.
This is also Katie Samara's second visit. The daughter of a Vietnam veteran, she's here to see a special friend.
I met her last year when I was here, and she lost all 8 of her kids during the war, and we just had a connection. She was grabbing onto me and didn't want to let me go, and I'd never make promises, but I promised her I would come back, so here I am.
Most of the residents are elderly, but others are severely mentally and physically handicapped, like this man, wheelchair-bound. A salute to Lance is his way of saying thanks. Such friendly gestures have a profound effect on the visiting veterans.
We just feel like we're giving a little bit of ourselves back to here, and it just helps me personally, spiritually, through giving back to these people we came over here earlier and harmed.
What it really is doing is that it is helping us in the never-ending process of forgiving ourselves and forgiving what happened in our other time when we were here during the war. And it validates that even though we were here as soldiers, now we can come here and offer healing not only for the Vietnamese people, but that healing gets reflected back to us. And that's what the real essence of the top mission has been. That's not just coming back to Vietnam, but that's coming back to Vietnam and doing humanitarian service, giving love.
While creating the documentary, there was so much material that it almost wrote itself. Every day would bring a new angle. Every day talking to another veteran would bring a new story. So as I mentioned earlier, it was a big challenge to try to get all that down to a 30-minute story because there's just so much to tell. So yeah, creating the documentary, I had a vision in my head. You know, the premise was Vietnam veterans going back to try and find closure. That's just the nugget. Then there's all the little tentacles that come off of that, and that's where you really get into the nitty-gritty of some of these stories. And one of the stories that one of the veterans shared with me was he was a world champion surfer. He was ranked 5th in the world. Then he got drafted, went off to Vietnam. He was the son of a Baptist preacher, had no interest in being part of the war, but he was a forward observer, and he recalled the story the first time that he had to kill the enemy. And he said they came face to face. It was either him or John. And still to this day, he still thinks of that, and he still has that image of his head. And it's been hard for him to deal with it, even though he knows he had to do it. If he didn't shoot the enemy, he would have been shot and killed. But even knowing that, he still harbors this guilt, tremendous guilt, of knowing that he had to kill somebody. And he thinks about that man's family. Was he a father? Was he a brother? Obviously, he was a family member. But it's something that he's been dealing with and still talks to counselors about it. The advice I would give to anyone coming in the industry, a videographer, nowadays they're called MMJs, multimedia journalists, get to know your subject. It's imperative that you know as much as you can about it. Because how are you going to tell a story if you don't know what you're talking about? And that comes with a lot of research, a lot of reading, talking to people who know about your subject, and then to find that human element, that emotional element, somebody who can take your subject, somebody who's lived it, who has the experiences, and that they can share that story, and that you can capture their emotion and just their experiences on videotape. And what I always like to tell people is if I'm interviewing them, if they're a subject of my story, I always just want to say, just tell me your story. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. Pretend the camera's not even there, just tell me. And the camera just happens to pick up our conversation. I think the more of that human emotion that you can pick up and share, that's going to be crucial for any good documentary or story that you're telling. Video is also, we're a visual medium, so video is very important. Nowadays with social media, you can see the kind of videos that go viral, those amazing shots that kind of just leave you almost breathless. So in telling documentaries, it's very important that you also have some very moving video to go along with it. Don't just have these static, generic shots. It's also important that your video matches what you're talking about. If it doesn't, we would call that generic video, and that's a channel clicker. You want your video to also help tell the story. When it comes to titling a documentary, that's a tough one because you might have an idea, one of your friends might have an idea, it's very subjective. But I think it's important for your title to capture what your story is about. And in my instance, when I did the documentaries on Vietnam, I called it Going Back Behind the Bamboo Curtain because it was all about communism. We were fighting communism, so it was kind of a reference to the Iron Curtain. So that's what I was thinking about, and there's a lot of bamboo in Vietnam. So going back behind the bamboo curtain was a reference to these Vietnam veterans going back, kind of behind enemy lines in a way too, because we did go to North Vietnam, and so they literally were in what was once enemy territory. Interviewing famous people. Over the years, I've interviewed quite a few politicians, And no, I don't really get nervous. It's actually, it's exciting. I've covered the National Finals Rodeo a lot, so I've interviewed a lot of country stars, Kenny Rogers, who else have I interviewed? Sarah Evans, Randy Travis. Some of the politicians would be, got to interview Vicente Fox, the former president of Mexico. He came up to Nogales quite a few years ago. And then just being at some of the events where some of these politicians are, they might just come through really quickly and you get one or two questions. So you don't really get that sit-down interview. So I did get to interview Garth Brooks. He's probably one of the more famous people that I interviewed. And that's when he came to Tucson to read to a school. And he was a great guy, so humble, down to earth. So he made it easy for me. But it was exciting because I walked up to him and I was wearing an Eskimo Joe shirt, which is a very famous shirt in Oklahoma. I'm originally from Pawnee, Oklahoma, junior high and high school. So I walked up to him and I was like, "Hey Garth, remember Eskimo Joe's?" And he knew it right away. And he goes, "Hey, where'd you get that shirt?" So we talked about our Oklahoma ties. And it was neat. I mean, I enjoy interviewing the famous people, but at the same time, I also don't want that fame to blind me where I'm not going to ask the tough questions if I have to be. Usually when you're interviewing famous people, there's nothing tough about it. They're usually promoting something. So you just hold up the microphone, ask them some questions, and they take over the interview. The people that I've interviewed who have left the biggest impression with me would have to be veterans. Some of the things that they've gone through, the horrors of war that they've seen, lived, and experienced is something that I will never comprehend because I've never done it. But to hear their personal stories of sacrifice, it gives me a sense of what it was like to be there. So I would say some of the most memorable interviews when it comes to interviewing veterans would have to be Waldo Werft. He lives right here in Tucson. He's 93 years old. He was a medic and stormed the beaches of Normandy back in the early 40s. I believe it was 1943. He was a medic, so he didn't have a weapon. He didn't have a gun. And here he is storming the beaches of Normandy, getting called out for help nonstop, running from one soldier and Marine to the next without a weapon. He could hear bullets whizzing by. He said they sounded like little mosquitoes whizzing by his ears. He says he probably escaped death 20 times that day. But he never stopped once to be. I asked him, were you scared? And he goes, "No, I didn't have time to be scared. I had a job to do. I had to save men's lives." And for him to tell me that statement, that's a part of an interview I will never forget, because I put myself in his shoes and I thought, man, could I do it? Would I have the fortitude, the bravery, the courage to do what he did so many years ago? And so it's humbling to interview somebody like that who's had such an experience. And then going back to Vietnam, some of those veterans I interviewed. One was a helicopter pilot who got shot while flying over a rice field. Shot him right in the leg, but hit an artery. He almost bled out. So he almost died right there in the rice paddy. So to hear these guys share these stories of near-death experiences, man, I feel honored to be able to hear their stories and then share them for others to experience and hear. What do I feel are my greatest achievements in life? Well, the birth of my two sons. So I have a 18-year-old who's now a freshman in college, and I have a 1.5-year-old son who's running around the house tearing things up. Those are my two greatest achievements. Marrying my wife, she's a wonderful woman. So those are my personal experiences for greatest achievements. Then when it comes to my career side of things, I would think the greatest achievement would be winning that Emmy Award for the cultural documentary for Vietnam, and then also when I got the main anchor job here in Tucson. I was on the weekends for 7.5 years as the weekend anchor, and I was actually starting to look around to maybe move because I really wanted to be a main anchor somewhere. And when this position came open, I applied for it. I still had 5 interviews despite my 7.5 years experience here. Still had to interview with the general manager, the sales manager, the news director, the promotions manager. And it took about 4 months where I filled in on the job, the dream job that I wanted. And so when I finally got that job, that was a great achievement for me career-wise. Do I feel that I've achieved my goals and dreams in life? Absolutely not. Once I get through with the media business, the journalism career that I've chosen, I want to run for office actually. So I'd like to work at KOLD for another 10, 12, 15 years, however long. I still love my job very much, so I don't want to quit. But once I retire from the news business, I will definitely run for office. I don't know if it's going to be Congress. I don't know if it'll be the State House. I don't know if it'll be mayor of Tucson. Who knows? Maybe the mayor of Marana. My wife tells me to shoot for higher goals than that. But yes, I definitely want to run for office and try to make a difference for just the Joe Blow American, the guy who's living and the woman who's living paycheck to paycheck, because I did that for so long in the beginning of my career. Because anybody who knows, if you're thinking about getting into this career, your first 5 to 10 years it's a struggle because the pay is so low. There's so many people who want to do it. Eat a lot of top ramen and hot dogs the first few years of this career. But those are some of my long-term goals. And after that, become a grandfather when my kids have kids and just live a long, healthy life. The best piece of advice I could give to anyone wanting to get in this field is work, work, work. This is the kind of industry where you get out what you put in. We've had interns here who really they hit the road running. They just pounded the pavement while they were here. They did anything and everything they could, constantly shadowing the reporters, the photographers, the producers, learning everything they could from the ground up. And they take that experience and then they make a resume tape. And we've literally had about 3 or 4 interns over my 17 years at Channel 13. They've been extraordinarily hard-working interns. All of them are now news anchors. One of them is a news anchor in San Diego, California, Jen Carlman. She was an intern here. She put together a resume tape, got her first job in Washington State, went to a couple of other stations. Now she's an anchor in San Diego, California, all because of her internship right here. So it is one of those businesses where you've got to put yourself above the rest of the field, because it's like so many other careers, there's a lot of people who want to get into it. So I think you just have to have a lot of fortitude. You can't take no for an answer. A lot of times people say no for an interview. I try to go around another way, and I will respect it if they don't want to do it, definitely, but I try never to take that first no for an answer. I'll try to come back for another angle to get them to do that interview. But I really think that just hard work. I've always been a firm believer in that, and just the more you put into it, the more you're going to get out. And with all that hard work is just learning everything you can. The business is changing rapidly. It's changed in the last 5 years so much I would have never imagined it 5 years ago. 10 years ago, we used the internet. There wasn't Twitter, there wasn't Facebook, there wasn't Instagram, there wasn't any of the social media like we have now. So that has literally changed the face of our industry. Some days I spend more time on Facebook and Twitter than I actually do for the news. I'm getting stories from Facebook. It's a great way for me to keep in touch with viewers, constantly getting bombarded with questions and story ideas. I love it. It's a great way to get a more of a personal connection that we never had in the past. So to me, it's been a benefit, but it's also been a big change. And also just the way technology is coming. Back when I first started, we had cameras on the shoulder with a little cable that hooked up to the camera case. Now we're using cell phones. I can go live from my cell phone to the station. We have apps that allow me to be out in the field. I can use my phone and be live on the newscast. So you also need to embrace technology, embrace social media, learn as much as you can about those avenues, and that's going to help you in this business as well. I would love to interview the sitting president of the United States. Past president would be pretty cool, but I think interviewing the sitting president, the current president, whoever it may be, after the election cycle, I think that would be an interview that I would completely enjoy, and to have it wide open, any questions allowed. And it would take me days to prepare for that interview because there'd be so many things I'd want to ask. But to have the opportunity to interview the President of the United States, that would be, to me, the dream interview. I have always looked up to Dan Rather, and I don't know if it's because I grew up watching him, but I've always worked for a lot of CBS affiliates as well for my career, so he was always there. I'm always watching him, but I also I kind of considered him a reporting anchor. He didn't just sit behind the desk. There's that famous video from years ago when he's being blown around holding onto a light pole during a hurricane. I mean, he was right in the mix, in the thick of things. And a very smart guy. You could definitely know that he knew his material. Foreign affairs, just knew so much. And so I always enjoyed watching Dan Rather. When I was getting my start in my career, I studied him. I would actually try to mock him in some of my delivery style. But yeah, he's one of the guys that I still look up to a lot. And now that Scott Pelley's taken over, I do enjoy watching Scott Pelley as well. With Dan Rather being that reporting anchor, being out in the field all the time. That's something that I try to do here. My first and foremost duty is to be an anchor, so I'm at the news set delivering the news. But I don't want to just be a reader. I like to know what the stories are about. I work very closely with the reporters. I like to know the intricacies, some of the backstories behind the stories we're doing. I just think it helps me not only just be more aware of what the story is about, but also to help tell the story and not just read the story. Thanks, Marco.
Thank you.